Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Within the framework of the National Tribal Energy Roundtable. My name is Marina Barnett. I'm a program manager with the United States Energy Association. In case you're not familiar with our organization, we are the United States Energy Association, founded in 1924, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and non-lobbying organization. Its mission is built on two equally important pillars: facilitating collaboration among energy stakeholders to exchange information on policy, science, and technology, and promoting global energy development by expanding access to safe, affordable, sustainable, and environmentally responsible energy in partnership with the U.S. government. USCA's diverse membership includes more than 100 domestic and international organizations, ranging from government agencies and educational institutions to Fortune 500 companies. It encompasses all forms of energy, serving as a resource for fostering constructive dialogue on energy policy and its implementation. Through its flagship events, webinars, briefings, and workshops, USCA provides an unbiased platform for discussing the most pressing energy issues. In line with its mission to increase understanding of energy developments domestically and internationally, USCA launched the Consensus Program in 2008 in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. This initiative focuses on advancing carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies, as well as other carbon management solutions to help meet global decarbonization goals. Despite significant progress, CCUS and carbon management technologies remain under-recognized, even as their widespread adoption is critical for addressing the continued reliance on fossil fuels, particularly in developing nations. Another key area of focus is the inclusion of Native American tribes in national energy discussions, particularly regarding climate adaptation and energy transitions. Tribes have historically played a crucial role in ensuring U.S. energy security through their production of uranium, coal, oil and gas, and hydropower. As the country pivots towards new energy sources, such as rare earth elements, hydrogen, and ammonia, tribes will continue to be integral to these developments. Recognizing this, USCA's Consensus Program features a series of webinars addressing energy-related issues facing tribal communities within the framework of the National Tribal Energy Roundtable. This webinar marks the 10th in the series, with 2 more upcoming. It is my particular pleasure to introduce Mr. Daniel Cardenas, who will serve both as a moderator and one of the speakers at today's webinar. He is the CEO and chairman of the National Tribal Energy Association and the American Indian Infrastructure Association, and also a co-founder of the Native American Mining and Energy Sovereignty Initiative. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marina. I appreciate all the work and hard work that you put and give us, as well as Alex, who's in behind the scenes as well. Normally, my partner, CJ Stewart, is on. He's been under the weather lately, and so it doesn't look like he'll be attending. But so my apologies if for his fans out there, if you're looking forward to hearing him. But you have me, so I think we'll be in good hands. Again, my name is Daniel Cardenas. As Marina mentioned, I'm a member of the Pit River Tribe, which is a small tribe in northeastern California. I usually don't mention that, but I just think that everybody knows. But the Pit River Tribe is a small tribe in the northeastern part of California, about 3,000 members, and I served on the tribal council, elected tribal council for many years, beginning when I was 18, and I've been retired probably for nearly a decade now. And so today's topic, critical minerals, I think is really important. If you've heard me in any capacity throughout the years, you always hear me talk about critical minerals in Indian country, that critical minerals equal Indian or tribal minerals. And so as we move forward in what we call the green transition, energy transition. I use the term energy evolution, but as we transition our use of fossil energy to other energies, uh, minerals and mining play a key role in that transition. We know that in our hearts and our guts, um, but the impact of that um, really hasn't been seen yet. We're really on the tip. We're really at the beginning of of that transition, and the need for new and more advanced minerals. And so I'll stop there for now. I'll have our friend Steve, who uh, who agreed to speak. A very busy guy, so we're glad to have him. But if Steve, if you can introduce yourself, and then I'll make my presentation, and then you can follow after.
Yeah, sounds good. So hello, everyone. My name's Steve Mian. I'm CEO and co-founder of Namu Communications. We're a Native American-owned telecom and network IT consulting firm, and we're just getting into the energy process. We're members of the Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone tribe, and we sit about 23 miles as the crow flies from the McDermott Caldera, which is the world's largest lithium deposit. So I'm happy to share just some of the things that we've been encountering as we've started the process. We're one of the first energy extraction, projects in the country, and we are in the midst of, wading through all the regulatory, federal, and corporate, negotiations and coordination for the project. So happy to meet everyone and happy to share today.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. I know you're traveling and at a conference, and so you've graciously agreed to give us an hour of your time and your expertise. So I appreciate that. So we'll start, Marina. I'll start. I normally don't give a presentation, but since critical minerals is an area where I speak a lot and talk a lot and really advocate for here in Indian country, I thought I could talk a bit about it. So the first thing before we start, I just wanted to throw out four statistics that you always hear me mention, but I want to lay that out first. I didn't put it into a slide, and I apologize for not having an introductory slide with my name, and but you know me. So I'll start with this: 90%, 97% of the nickel, 89% of the copper, 79% of the lithium, and 68% of the cobalt resources in the United States are within 35 miles of an Indian reservation. And so I just wanted to keep that in your mind as we move forward on this discussion. So our first slide is usually it's really the state of the discourse right now all over our country, around the world, but primarily in Indian country. These are just some examples of the opinions and the thoughts and ideas of some folks, very vocal folks, and very out there folks about what they think about mining. And obviously, those pictures say it all. They don't like mining. Next slide. The next slide uh, is a really good cartoon, and I want to, and I apologize, I should have said this at the beginning. I I have a good friend, Dr. Adam Simon, who's a professor at the University of Michigan. He actually was presented on our first webinar on critical minerals. I borrowed some of his slides, and as well as some other slides of his from different presentations, and sort of redid them in my own messaging. But I borrowed those from him, so I wanted to give him credit for that. But this is a cartoon that he likes to put in at the end of his presentations. But I put it in at the beginning because really it's a virtue signaling about it's a good illustration about how most people in the U.S. and how they think about mining. Is that we like the previous picture, really the story there is mining is bad, mining is evil, but we're basically telling ourselves that, lying to ourselves as we look in the mirror, because the reality is we need mining for the energy transition, but we don't want it in our backyard. And so it's something that we deal with or don't deal with on a daily basis. And so I thought that sort of laying the lay of the land in terms of especially when it comes to Indian country, you know, because we're smaller populations, you know, we're fragmented into 574 different federally recognized tribes. We're only a small percentage of the population in the U.S. And so this idea, this anti-mining sentiment is much more complex, but also very laser focused on our communities. And so that these arguments are sort of much more impactful to our leaders and to our communities. And so next slide. Our administration, and if you're are large believers in this, and we all are, if we have minds and really think about things in the bottom of our heart, we know that climate change is an issue, and that we need to sometime in the future we need to achieve net zero emissions. And so with the Paris Accord, with the IRA, with infrastructure bill, all kinds of legislation going around the world in Europe, especially with carbon taxes in Canada to the north, you know, with our friends in Asia and Australia, they're all going through varying degrees of legislation and societal change, and having these discourses and discussions around climate change and net zero. But so this is just I wanted to throw this statement out there. By 2050, we need renewable technologies need to provide 90% of our energy consumption if we want to meet our climate goals. Next slide. Which means that for all purposes, we need to electrify everything basically everything that we do, our products that we make, the processes to make those products, by and large, need as much as possible need to be electrified. This is sort of like sort of the not just common sense, but and also the background of this administration and the IRA, but really just one of the solutions. We're not talking about anything related to carbon capture, which is another subject that you hear us talk about a lot. If we continue down this sort of train of thought and this logic, is that we have to electrify everything. And these are just some examples of where there's a lot of focus right now around vehicles, heat pumps for our homes, and electric appliances, and battery storage and so forth. Next slide. So in order for us to get there, we need to amplify and increase our energy production, which is primarily electricity when we talk about renewables. And so this is sort of just you don't really have to look at it. It's really hard to see, but this is really an illustration of where wind and solar are basically today, where the developments are going on, in the areas of the country where there's primarily, again, in Texas, California, Midwest, Great Plains, where most of the production is going on. But it's an illustration just based on miles, on acreage and land use. Next slide. But this is where we need to be by 2050 in order to meet our net zero goals, the Paris Accord goals, our national goals, different state goals. This is what the coverage of our lands will look like for solar and wind by 2050. So much more significant growth. We haven't even started the real growth that, and these and keep in mind, these these maps and information was really way before we start talking about AI in advanced data centers. And so the production from AI, advanced data centers, hydrogen, ammonia, advanced fuels, and that kind of thing aren't really illustrated in these pictures. So keep that in mind as well. We should update these, but basically it's significant, the two pictures, the differences between those two. Next slide. And just to give an illustration, the minerals that are needed for a wind turbine, those 15 or so minerals there, are really the basics behind turbines. Next slide. And the same for solar panels. These are the various minerals, and I haven't memorized them, but it's a significant amount. Next slide. One of the things we really talk about, this administration, there's a lot of focus with the DOE Loans Program Office. It seems like every week they're announcing a new loan or a new grant for battery storage, electric vehicle batteries, electric vehicle plants, and through in the whole supply chain. But one of the targets of the administration is to have 50% of electric vehicle sales by 2030. So meaning half of our auto market in the U.S. would be electric vehicles. That's the goal. There are 300 million vehicles, give or take, in the U.S. currently at any given time, and approximately between 12 and 15 million vehicles are sold per year of all kinds. And so in order to meet that goal, we're using some assumptions here throughout this presentation. So the assumptions that we're making on the next slides will be, we need to sell or produce 8 million electric vehicles per year by 2030. And that number needs to rise to 16 million per year by 2050, which would mean our entire auto industry would need by 2050 to be electric vehicle. Next slide. So within a typical electric vehicle, the battery pack weighs about 1,200 pounds, and so these are just some typical average amounts of critical minerals and minerals that are needed, that are in the battery, or in the electric vehicle. Apologies. 200 pounds of copper, 25 pounds of lithium, 60 pounds of nickel, 40 pounds of manganese, 31 pounds of cobalt, and 10 to 11 pounds of rare earth metals. Next slide. And so if you extrapolate that to the 8 million electric vehicles, battery operated electric vehicles, as we said earlier, to get to 50%, just in the US, these are the demands that are needed by those minerals. And if you look next, we'll need 1.6 billion pounds of copper, 200 million pounds of lithium, 480 million pounds of nickel, 352 million pounds of manganese, 248 million pounds of cobalt, and 40 to 80 million pounds of rare earth. And you look at what's actually produced in the US currently for existing uses, not for the 8 million electric vehicles that need to be produced. You can see that there's a big difference. The only one that we really produce in mass is copper. But don't let that fool you. Like I said, the demand is 1.6 billion pounds. We currently produce 2.6 billion pounds. So there is a supply gap there. So that's what this is supposed to illustrate, is on every one of these, including manganese, which we produce none in the U.S. We need significant amounts of commodity, mineral commodities to meet those goals. Next slide. And this is just double, right? So by 2050, if we get to 16 million electric vehicles, all that demand just doubles. This is on an annual basis. So this is every year. We need these kinds of productions to annually sell those. Once we get to 16 million, it's not like we're not over. We stop selling cars because everybody will have one. They will continue to be sold, maybe not in the same volumes, but they're still going to continue to be a market. And so as old ones retire and as population grows, and again, this is just the U.S., right? And so this is not world production. This is not including Australia and Canada and Japan, China, the EU. And the rest of the world. Next slide. And so a lot of slides moving forward we'll just focus on copper. And so and this just illustrates that to get to 8 million electric vehicles, we need 1.6 billion pounds of new copper that doesn't exist. It's not in the system. It's totally new copper. Next slide. You really can't see it, but this picture is supposed to illustrate the Bingham Canyon mine, which is in near Salt Lake City, west of Salt Lake City. If you have ever flew in to Salt Lake City International Airport, you will invariably see this mine. It's one of the only. Also, you can see it from space. The mine, so it's one of the largest, if not the largest. It's the largest mine in the U.S., but one of the largest in the world. But that mine produces 350 million pounds of copper per year, which is significant, and probably about 15% of the production of current production in the U.S. of copper. But in order to meet the 50% of electric vehicles, 8 million electric vehicles on the road, we need to have 5 of those Bingham Canyon mines come online every year for decades. And so that mine was, I believe, was opened in 1906, early 1900s, and has produced, I think, 4 to 5 billion pounds of copper in its lifetime, and continues, like I said, continues to produce 350 million tons a year. But to get to 100%, we need 10 of those in the U.S. every year for the next few decades, if not longer. Next slide. So there's a lot of questions that people have. Those, if we go back to the first pictures of the folks that are anti mining, they've got a lot of questions. A lot of these are valid questions. But one of them is mining is too risky. Next slide. Since 1940, and like this number is a little bit outdated, but as of, I believe, 2020, 100 employees, which is still a lot of people. But given all the mining that has gone on since 1940 for the last 80 plus years, in all the different industries, coal, copper, every mine, hundreds of mines that have existed, and many of them closed in the U.S., we've lost 100 workers. Next slide. One of the other points that people make is, hey, if it's mine, we can recycle it, which is true. There's a lot of recycling going on. Some of the recycling that we're sort of used to as consumers is aluminum, copper, those kind of minerals, much of which do get recycled. Next slide. You don't really need to read this, but this is the recycling that's going on in the lithium market right now. So on the bottom of that is current production in the U.S. Over time, as you go to the right, by 2040, where the top line where it's red, that's going to be total demand. And so all the colored parts on this, it's blue, orange, and red. The colored parts is recycling. That's the amount of recycling that they estimate that the experts estimate can be feasibly economically recycled from lithium annually, which means that gray part of the gray part of the picture is what's going to be mined and what's not going to be recycled. So it looks like probably 20% of the lithium market by 2040 will be able to get from recycling. Next slide. This one's even harder to read, so please don't try. These are just illustrations again of cobalt and nickel and the other minerals of the amounts that can and will be recycled. The colored parts, again, the significant amounts, but the portion that won't be recycled are significant. Next slide. One of the things that we hear, if you listen to the administration and to the world leaders around the world, there's a lot of focus on Africa and Australia and Canada and all over except the U.S. So one of the points that people make and believe is that there are no mineable metal deposits left in the U.S. Next slide. Again, this is really hard to read, but each of those colored points are equal mineral resources in the U.S. The top 50 minerals in the U.S. The top 50 critical minerals on our critical minerals list, either it's USGS, DOD, exists in the U.S. So we have all those minerals somewhere in the United States, and that's just a quick illustration of that. Next slide. So given all this, what's the solution to our metal supplies shortage? Next slide. The solution is mining. Obviously, it's mining. As this points, carbon neutrality requires new mining. In order for us to get to being carbon neutral, that doesn't mean no fossil energy. It means if we neutralize the emissions for the fossil energy that we need moving forward to run our economy and our industry, we're going to need a whole lot more mining on magnitudes that we haven't had in this country for probably ever. Next slide. This is just an example, and I don't want to steal Steve's thunder because this is his backyard of his tribe. But I just really wanted to mention, a couple of examples, 2 examples. This is just one of the impact of one mine. If we need if we get, again, by 2050, if we get 50% of electric vehicle penetration in our market, we're going to need 213 million pounds of lithium. The Thacker Pass, the proposed mine, is proposing, according to the BLM, 16 million pounds of lithium, which equates to 664,000 electric vehicles. Of those 8 million electric vehicles that we're going to need by 2050, Thacker Pass by itself will produce enough for 664,000 vehicles. The next slide. This cobalt mine in Idaho, the only cobalt mine around, and I believe it's not operating. But using that as an example, there's only one in the U.S. Same statistics, 8 million vehicles by 2050. we're going to need 260 million pounds of cobalt annually. This mine is permitted to produce 1 million pounds, which is 23,000 vehicles. And so we're going to need 250 plus times 250 of these more of these mines annually just to meet our goals. Next slide. Another illustration of where we're at, where we've been, and where we're going. This is just a supply gap illustration. The light blue is current and existing mines that are operating in the world today, and where that production will be by 2035. The green is projects that are in the queue, all the projects that are proposed. Add a couple million tons. If you look at that graph right now, we're producing around 26 million tons a year of copper, and globally, new mines in the queue add a couple million tons. But by 2035, just in the next decade, there's going to be a supply gap of 8 to 10 million tons of mines that don't exist, of mines that are not on the drawing. Next slide. And this is just another example of some around 10 different minerals that that we here in the U.S. What the supply and demand is, and what's actually supplied. The only mineral that's basically supplied is lead. Everything else, there's a gap. There's a supply gap. Next slide. And again, another illustration of the supply gaps in the world. Again, that copper numbers of 8 to 10 million, lithium and cobalt. So the blue and the light blue are current and proposed production, and then the gaps are very significant. Next slide. And so this question, where are the minerals going to come from? And here's where Indian country comes in. Next slide. So this map illustrates those four statistics that I mentioned at the beginning. 97% of the nickel, 89% of the copper, 79% of the lithium, and 68% of the cobalt will come from within 35 miles of an Indian reservation. And so the green, the darker green, is in current Indian reservations, and those yellow and red dots are mines, existing mines, historical mines, proposed mines. There's just an illustration of where current Indian reservations in Indian country exist and where the mineral exists. And so, as you can see, there's not many. The reality is there's not many of these dots are on a reservation. There are very few metallic metals that the critical minerals that are produced in Indian country. Most of the mining that happens in Indian country are industrial minerals, gravel, and things of that sort to make cement, and limestone and that kind of stuff is produced in Indian country as well. But that's really the extent of mining in Indian country. And so what we'll talk about later is why that is, what's going on, where are the gaps, why aren't there more mines in Indian country, and to me that's the opportunity here that we want to illustrate in this conversation is around the supply chain of that mining, whether it goes on Indian reservations or off reservation. The supply chains that tribes can supply as entrepreneurs, as company owners, or individual tribal members, that sort of thing. I think there's there's a myriad of opportunities around critical minerals and supply chain where this actually comes that can sort of organically grow from this map. And I'll want to say one thing as well. Another thing that I've mentioned that you've heard me talk about as well in the past is many Native Americans, when you ask them what's Indian country, and they'll say the whole United States is Indian country. The whole U.S. is some tribes' ancestral territory, and so obviously that's not the legal definition, but it's the perception and reality. The perception is that every inch of the country is Indian country, and so that's why you see a lot of issues around the opening of new mines, proposed mines on federal lands and private lands, and a lot of pushback from tribes and tribal communities is because many of those people believe that all of America is Indian country. And next slide. This is just an example of we'll have two examples of mines, of proposed mines that were denied by the administration. And this one is the Boundary Waters project between Minnesota and Canada. But had that mine been approved, it would be producing 99 million pounds of copper, 31 million pounds of nickel, and 1.6 million pounds of cobalt. Next slide. Same for the Pebble mine, which was proposed. It really even wasn't a proposed mine; it was just an idea. It hadn't made an application for a mine in Alaska. That mine would have produced 320 million pounds of copper. Next slide. This is an illustration of where we're at right now. This is just a little bit old, but we're basically at that point where things diverge. The emissions, global emissions is there approximately. If we curb our emissions, if we put carbon management, CCUS, if we are more sustainable with our mining practices, if we cut back on our energy consumption and our consumption of everything, that white line as it goes down, and that gray is sort of the universe of where emissions will go, especially including with growth. But if we don't do anything, or we do less, that will be below that white line as it goes up. We will increase, and then it'll fall somewhere in that gray area underneath that top line. Those will be our emissions moving forward. So that's just an example of what could be, what's going to come if we do something, we don't do anything, or we do something less. Next slide. Just another illustration. This is an illustration of certain folks' perspective on, why we can't or won't be able to get those new mines on the table, won't be built, because this illustration, 7 to 10 years, it's really from 2 to 15 years, basically. Vast majority of mines do get permitted on federal lands, and so the averages are probably a little bit from things I've seen of late, below 7, probably around 5. But it's just an illustration of some of the issues that we have that tie the first slide, the no to mining, with the need to mine, and the reason why, one of the reasons why things are taking so long is because there are lawsuits. There's a lot of opposition to mining. Next slide. That may be the last slide. I can't remember. It looks like it may be the last slide. So what I wanted to end with is one point is that if you're anti-fossil energy, you have to be pro mining. There's no other logical path. If we want to keep, using the energy that we use today at higher and higher rates, we don't need all that extra mining. And so, we don't know what that balance looks like. And that's part of the conversation, especially in Indian country, is if we want to cut back on fossil energy, which will impact some tribes. There are tribes that, as we've mentioned, tribes that are fossil energy producing and will continue to produce fossil energy. But if we want to cut back on that, there are even more opportunities in critical minerals for Indian country. Like I said, from 68 to 97% of critical minerals exist in Indian country. Hundreds and billions of pounds of minerals that we need annually to meet our climate goals. And just one of them, like I said, the 8 million electric vehicle goal and 16 million, I've just sort of pointed out what that need is. And so to me, parallel to that is a big chunk of that production will potentially can come from Indian country. That means jobs. That means company wealth, profits. That means Indian country potentially can be at the beginning of the curve for the energy transition rather than at the end. As I mentioned before, we're always the last invited to dinner and the first asked to leave. This opportunity means we're going to be first at the table to eat and be able to eat and prosper for decades to come. And so this is just an illustration of what could be. And as we have this dialogue and discourse in Indian country, I just wanted to throw that out there. And then as we move into Steve's his discussion about the opportunities around what face his tribe and the ideas around supply chain and different ways that the tribe can benefit its people. I think that it adds a good parallel to what I've just talked about. So I'll stop there, and then we can start with Steve.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to share a presentation, so give me 1 sec to do that. Great. So this is just a bit of an overview of our tribe. And as a general disclaimer, just so everybody's kind of clear, we only have one official representative of the tribe that is our tribal chairman. So my statements are my own individual in my work with the tribe and those sorts of things. They do not reflect my tribe's public statements, those sorts of things. Just a general disclaimer. But as we go through this, what we wanted to really kind of talk about is some of the things that we've already encountered in our engagement. As I mentioned before, we are one of the first tribes to encounter a critical mineral mine, the Thacker Pass lithium mine, as Daniel mentioned. And so we're going to share some of the things as we've gone through the process and some of the learnings that I think can be applied across the board, for the large percentage of tribal nations that are going to be impacted, as Daniel showed in the information. So just a little bit about the tribe itself. The Fort McDermott Paiute Shoshone tribe, of which I'm a member, is located on the northern Nevada, southern Oregon border in McDermott, Nevada. Our reservation was founded in 1889 as a military installation. An outpost, and so that's where we eventually got our reservation lands, returned when we formed the reservation in 1936. We are originally known as the Atsakadakwa Tuviwagayu, the Red Mountain Dwellers, band of the Northern Paiute Shoshone, and we have a population of roughly about 465, 340 on the reservation, about 50 people in McDermott, a membership of roughly 1,500 across the nation. And you can see some of the statistics there. So what's I wanted to also show, because this is very relevant to the conversation today, is our tribe and the McDermott Caldera. So I have a couple of different pieces. The two slides that you see, or the two images that you see here in black and white, are the original 1936 studies, or I'm sorry, 1939 study from Omer Stewart, an anthropologist that documented all of the Northern Paiute bands. So as you can see, this is kind of our general view of all of the different bands that were in the area. And from Daniel's map, you can see kind of the Nez Perce are right in here. We also have a lot of bands that were around us, so you can kind of see those. But if you zoom into the area, and what I've done is kind of pointed out the rough approximate area of the McDermott caldera. In our case, the McDermott caldera and the lithium mines, as are outlined here from the Oregon Natural Desert Research Institute, this is directly in the epicenter of our ancestral homeland. One of the things that we found is that only about, and this is per the Bureau of Land Management, only about 15 to 20% of this entire area in the caldera has been surveyed, researched, and documented. We also have a significant amount of native plant beds, burial sites, sacred areas. Thacker Pass, was mentioned, obviously, that's down here. And Sentinel Peak is where we had some traditional ceremonies, and where there may have been, we're still trying to verify that with archaeologists and others, where the site of a massacre had occurred. However, this entire caldera was in continuous habitation for, we've dated it to at least 14,000 years and going back even further. So one of the things that we're going to be very, stringent and advocate with the Bureau of Land Management and all of the agencies that are involved is that we have the ability to document both the cultural and environmental research that needs to be done on the caldera. And so we're in the process of working through those things with the various agencies. We've got a training program inside the tribe for tribal members to be trained as archaeologists and environmental and cultural researchers. And that's one of the things that we've learned some best practices from the Canadian Indigenous communities, because they have been kind of the first that have had to encounter that with the fossil fuel industry. And so they have a pretty good set of standard best practices for when, mining companies engage with, the indigenous tribes and the First Nation tribes up there. And so since they were some of the first to encounter it and come up with kind of a process, we're trying to see if we can adapt that to the US, market and into the, to this particular project. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is that we have basically Lithium Americas is the first of 7 claims on the caldera. So you can see that this is the first project phase, and you can see that that's here. The caldera itself has a deposit of 350 feet of lithium. So this operation is expected to last 40 years, and it's expected to employ anywhere between 300 and 400 employees at steady state for just this claim. As you can see on the map, there's another giant project over here on the west side of the caldera. We also have Jindalee, which is high-tech minerals. They're currently going through the research and exploration phase. FMS, Aurora, and Live are the rest of the claimants on the caldera. And all of them are a combination of Australian companies, Lithium Americas, and Canadian companies. So this is basically what our tribe is facing for the next probably 100 years. And that's important to put into context because obviously, as you saw from Daniel's information, this is the largest lithium deposit found in the entire world. And so we know that we are going to, be contending with this for probably the next 100 years and multiple generations of our leadership. So what we're trying to figure out, right, collectively, is we also, we know that there's no stopping what's going to happen here, because obviously, both the deposits, all of the incentives are there, right, to do this. However, what we're trying to figure out is, can we actually engage with communities in a different way? Can we engage them early? We were not engaged early. And so we're going through that right now formally with the Department of Energy and the Bureau of Land Management and all the government agencies. And so that's one of the lessons that we learned, early on, was that a lack of early direct, coordination engagement, not just consultation, those types of things, is critically important to basically accelerate these types of projects. Because if there's no engagement initially, or even in the early exploration phases, a lot of things then have to get done after the fact, after a lot of, lack of information and a lot of protests, come out, and just basic non-knowledge of the projects, right? And so the earlier that tribal nations can engage with that, and the earlier that the government agencies can basically mandate or get the exploration companies to have direct interactions and direct coordination efforts with the tribes, is a hugely important starting step to basically get these projects accelerated. Because as Daniel mentioned in his presentation, right, the timeline of this particular process was about 5 years, and we are finding that there were steps that were accelerated that we're going to have to go back and contend with now. And so that's kind of a broad overview of the opportunity there. Daniel, I'll open that up for any questions that you might have.
Well, thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate you joining us and presenting a little bit about your tribe and the McDermott caldera and the lithium resource. And this is just one illustration, right? As I mentioned, there's 574 tribes. Each tribe can go through this process, has been going through it in some way. But that's the opportunity, and like Steve mentioned, some of these like Jindali, they're still going through the exploration and research phases of what exists on those leases. Because there's a lot of information that doesn't exist or is outdated. That's one of the points that I made at the beginning, was that not just in Indian country, but throughout the United States, especially the Western US, is that much of our federal lands, and for sure, almost 100% of our tribal lands haven't been fully looked at, explored with modern technology. And I use a really quick example. As a friend of mine who I mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Adam Simon, who I visited with last week in Golden, Colorado. He just today announced a new firm that he's a part of. They have a technology that is able to help with exploration and finding metallic minerals through water, through well water and subsurface water. They can test it and know with a high degree of probability that there are minerals underneath those waters. And so that's just one thing, one example of new technologies that are out there. And so I'll ask this question, Steve, about your ideas. Again, we know that you don't represent your tribe directly, but your ideas as an individual, as an entrepreneur, about the opportunities for in regards to supply chain or providing services, not just to Lithium Americas as an example, but other mines and throughout not just your band's territory, but throughout, say, northern Paiute territory. I mean, what are the opportunities that you've identified that you can talk about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that we encountered as part of the research process as we started to engage is a program that right now it's a White House initiative called the Justice 40 program. And that covers any Department of Energy funded projects and mandates that 40% of the loan value must be provided in economic benefit to local disadvantaged communities. And as part of that program, basically there is a set of contract services as well as companies that can qualify for either federal grant programs or financing for the businesses, those types of things. And so what we're starting to put together is the list of projects and companies that we could establish to provide services to the mine, because as was mentioned before, this is the first one with 400 employees. There's about 1,100 people that are going to be involved in the initial construction of the mine operations, just on Lithium Americas alone. So if you extrapolate that out across these other 6, then we're going to have about probably about 3,000 people entering the area over the next 15 to 20 years as these mines come online. And we have zero infrastructure. As a matter of fact, we've applied as a tribe to do the tribal broadband connectivity program to get our internet services established, our cell phone connectivity established as a tribal community broadband provider. And that's one of the businesses that we can then contract services back to the mine operations. So internet and cellular, we're leveraging the tribal broadband, federal grant programs and some of the BEAD funding to get our reservation systems online. And then we can use, the Justice 40 program or the negotiation, right, in a community benefit agreement. That's one of the mandates of the Justice 40 program, is that there's an established community benefit agreement between the identified disadvantaged communities, which all tribes qualify, and the mining concern. So network and internet is definitely one of the services that we can contract back to the mine. The second one is that we are actually getting into the renewable energy business, right, as a utility provider, because of the Department of Energy. They have an Office of Indian Energy, right, and we've applied for some grant programs jointly with our fellow tribes. We have the Upper Snake River Tribes Organization, and that is composed of ourselves, Duck Valley, Fort Hall, and Burns. Those are the four tribes that are basically in the area, and those were the tribes on this map right here that were kind of around us, adjacent. So these tribes up here were the ones that were basically eventually made up the Upper Snake River Tribes Organization. So as we're going through the utility piece to set up a microgrid for our own reservation, again, one of the things that we've written into our energy plan is the ability to take, be able to provide renewable energy in a microgrid for the mine operations, right, and the offices, those sorts of things. So that's another area where we can contract for services back to the mine, and then obviously we're going to staff that with tribal employees and those types of things. The other third kind of major business that we're looking at in terms of the mine is basically construction services, as well as commercial development. Those are kind of two functional areas. And then within that, we have warehousing and security, because obviously, as they're going to start delivering materials, to the mines, we can do that. So what we're doing as a tribe is identifying some of the services that will be needed, because if you can kind of see on the map, we are really remote. There's about 400 people right here. And it's not a very heavily populated area. It's mostly ranching and farming, right? And so as we get into an influx of population, there's going to be other surround services, right? Restaurants, the mine camps themselves, right? So the housing for the mine employees, those types of things. So as we start to get into the operational side of this, we're trying to work and coordinate with both the federal agencies, Lithium Americas themselves, and then General Motors eventually, because they're a major funder, and they have a massive stake in Lithium Americas. We're trying to get a list of projects and programs together that will both basically provide services to the mine, and also, because we're a minority-owned business, that also meets their diversity procurement requirements. And then we're working with some of our communications partners to potentially develop a supply chain where we can build some of the renewable pieces for communications, and put that on our southern lands, which are a little bit further south of our reservation area, just off the map here. So we have multiple different businesses that we could potentially contract for services for, and that will at least help with the economic side of things, and obviously the workforce development. If I flip back to the first page here, we're sitting at a 72% unemployment rate, and our median income on the reservation is $20,000 a year, right? So we're trying to significantly improve that for our members and our communities. And if we can provide contract services for both network power and construction, right, and those other, all of the different mine services that are needed, that could have a significant benefit to the community. But obviously our primary concern is to ensure that the lands are cared for, and that's another thing that is part of the Justice 40 program. Is we are, as part of those businesses, trying to secure the environmental and cultural research projects on the caldera, because our members are obviously by far the most qualified people. We've got our institutional knowledge that's been handed down for generations. We know things that we've never told anyone, right? And so we know the land better than anyone. because we've continuously occupied it for thousands of years. And so that's kind of the case that we're making as we go into the coordination efforts, is if we are trained as tribal staff archaeologically and environmentally, we can make sure that these assessments are completed. We can make sure that they're done correctly. We can also make sure that everyone, that has a stake in the water and air continuing to be clean for the next 100 years, right? We have all those mitigation pieces in place, right, as we plan those things. So those are the companies that we're looking at.
Well, thanks for that. This short presentation, I know, time is of the essence as we get up to our hour. But the whole point to these webinars in the series is to sort of pique the interest and sort of start the conversation in Indian country. It already hasn't been going on in this sort of flavor, right? But as you know, there's a lot of anti this and anti that, anti-mining, anti-renewable, anti-fossil energy, anti-development, anti-tribal council. There are a lot of antis in Indian country, but we really wanted to illustrate a positive, something that's pro, potentially. And so I'm glad that you were able to come and share a little bit about the potential in your area. And as we move forward, hopefully over the next year or so, we'll have other opportunities to bring you in to maybe give updates on what's going on and where you're at. But I agree. I think you make a good point at the end of your presentation, is that the Fort McDermott people, the first people there, have not only the most knowledge and the most history there, but also this is their area, this is where they live, and they want to keep it. They want to improve it. And so you didn't mention remediation, but I know that's also there as well as the potential once the reserve and the resource is gone, the ability to remediate it and make the land to a state where maybe it's even better than it was before. I think that's technically possible. We've seen cases of that here in Wyoming, around coal mining and other places in the West. And so I just wanted to mention that, again, not speak for you or your people, but I just wanted to throw that out there as well, because like you said, you guys are the ones that can best speak and be the biggest champions for your lands and the opportunity here. And you guys should be the top recipients, because that number that you pointed out, and on average 20,000 average income of folks at Fort McDermott versus the county average of 75,000. I mean, it's huge. It's not even close. It's significant. And those other people make their living around gold mining and all the other mining that exists as well. But maybe if you had some last words before we end it.
Yeah, just the closing thoughts on that, and that's a great point that you made. I think this is one of the opportunities that all tribes have, and I completely agree with the sentiment of the way that the mine companies have historically treated indigenous nations, especially in the U.S. I mean, my tribe was already impacted by the first gold rush, wiped out our entire food ecosystem, and that's how we lost our lands in the first place. And then we had a Cordero mercury mine that ended up contaminating, a good chunk of the reservation that we had to get EPA to come and clean up. And so we've already dealt with after effects, of those types of things already. And so what's important to us is that we basically can be at the table at the very beginning and establish these things and basically take the long-term view, because we have an opportunity here. Mines are typically high-risk businesses, right? And so the first things that they tend to overlook are things like regulations and safety and all those things. And so one of the things that we're in remediation, and what we're trying to do, because we have an opportunity here, is to say, hey, we can engage mines in a different way, right? The Canadian First Nations have done a great job of helping to kind of set some standards in place on the things that we're entitled to enable our own tribal sovereignty. And so those pieces are critically important at the very beginning. And if we can kind of get that approach done, because this, like we made these comments to the White House Critical Minerals Working Group, that, you know, this is not going to be a unique issue. Every tribe, you know, as Daniel mentioned, 68 to 97%, you know, of the tribes impacted by this are going to go through a very similar piece when it comes to exploration, making sure that the mines operate, you know, and are monitored and everything is there correctly, the environmentals are done, and most importantly, that the mitigation plans post-mine are in place from the very beginning, because I think that's where a lot of the industry has been able to kind of just push that off onto, you know, government agencies or local communities after they're done with the mine operation, again, because of the expense involved in remediation. But we have an opportunity here to basically put that on the table from the very beginning and get much more of a direct collaborative relationship. And in closing, I would say I cannot stress getting legal representation, reaching out to organizations, you know, like Daniel's and others, because there's a lot of resources out there and people that are willing to pitch in and help to make this effective. Because, you know, these projects can be done in a way that doesn't impact and destroy communities, right? What we need to do collectively as tribal nations, as stakeholders in the process, and, you know, working directly with these government agencies, is to set a new standard for how to do this the right way, because we do need to go through the energy transition, right? We're all, you know, environmentalists at heart. We all want clean water and air, and, you know, we want our grandkids to be able to live on the land, right? And so, you know, those things are all important. At the same time, we just have to be, you know, honest about the process and what it's going to be, and just put that in place and have the resources to support it. So thanks for the time today. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks a lot, Steve. And I'll end with this, is that, as he mentioned, the right way is really how the mine of the future needs to be operated. Right now, we're going at the Colorado School of Mines and the DOE and other entities and agencies are having discussions about what does that look like, mine of the future. And exactly what we pointed out, especially with not just tribal engagement, but tribal participation in these projects. And so I think this is just one great example, an illustration of what can and should happen. And so I'd like to thank you, Steve, for participating, breaking away from your conference and joining us. Thank you, Marina, for the introduction and support of this series. And so I wanted, and also to thank the audience for participating today, watching and listening, and if you have any questions, again, like I said, we always leave the questions towards the end. You always have the opportunity to ask while we're online here. And then if there's no questions at hand, you can also email Marina and the team any questions, and then try to answer those offline as well. But thanks to the team, and hopefully this has just piqued the interest of folks that are watching, folks that will watch once the video is uploaded to YouTube, and you'll be able to watch it at your leisure. But hopefully this has brought up some questions, answered some questions towards having this discussion as we move forward in the country.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Steve, for these very informative and interesting presentations. Thank you to our audience for joining us. I hope to see you again at our next webinar. Please stay tuned for the announcement. And on that, have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.